Hi, my name is Dr. Kasia Kynes. I'm the founder and CEO of EBV Global Institute. Today we're talking about EBV and multiple sclerosis. Can EBV cause multiple sclerosis? So, first, the study from 2022 that caused a lot of upheaval and fears in our EBV community. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what it said and strengths and weaknesses of that study, because that's important. And then we're going to look at other factors, because MS is so complicated, that can actually induce multiple sclerosis outside of EBV. And then we're going to bring it back looking at studies that actually do confirms that EBV is implicated in the pathogenesis of multiple sclerosis. However, the take-home message for you, if you have chronic EBV or mono, is I never want you to think that if you have EBV, you automatically will develop multiple sclerosis. Doesn't work this way. We have so many people in our community with EBV, and so few of those actually develop multiple sclerosis. So that's the message. If anything, I want you to take out of this conversation is that actually it doesn't have to happen. So let's jump right in. I'm going to look at the study a little bit because that's scientific, so I may need to read a little bit for you. So the study was looking at, it was a cohort study looking at 1 million adults on active military duty. So they pulled 955 cases of MS that they developed during their service. And they made a comment that the risk of MS increased 32-fold after infection with EBV. Other viruses didn't show that relationship. And they also quoted a study from 2006 about the EBV antibodies, that they were a strong and consistent predictor of MS in people that had EBV up to 15 to 20 years later. Now, I have to make a reservation about this point because EBV shows in about 90% of normal population. So only a small fraction of people with EBV don't develop that. And 95% of global population has EBV antibodies anyway. They've had it. So their claim was that there's no other explanation, and therefore, here we go, they concluded that the findings cannot be explained by any other risk factor for EBV and suggest that EBV is a leading cause of MS. Is it true? I'm not sure if it's the leading cause. We're going to go through some other studies later. But what I want to bring back is the point that there's other things in the multiple sclerosis universe. One of them is vitamin D, the early childhood exposure or lack of it. There's lots of evidence for that. And in fact, I wrote the blog that I'm looking at. So I have a cheat sheet here. So I encourage you to read that. The references are there so you can actually look at the whole story. And the study also didn't take into consideration the environmental impact and toxicity that soldiers experience, especially when they are on employment. And we know with multiple sclerosis that heavy metals such as arsenic, cadmium, and mercury have been studied to be linked to multiple sclerosis. Now let's move back to EBV directly and the studies that talk about other studies than this one from 2022 that do talk about a strong relationship between EBV and multiple sclerosis. The first study that I want to bring in is Dr. Harley's study from just a few years ago. Let me see here. This was 2018, and I'd love to meet Dr. Harley. He looked at specific proteins from the virus that can go into your DNA coding on code for autoimmunity. And there's 7 particular autoimmune conditions that he tracked back directly to EBV, to that protein, and MS is one of them. So that's unfortunate. There's also a study from 2015. An EBV infection is considered an obligatory precondition to multiple sclerosis. There's some other studies. There's one from 2010, epidemiological studies. So these are studies on large populations, suggest that childhood EBV exposure is an important determinant of MS risk. Then there's a study from 2000 in a group of 108 patients with multiple sclerosis. 100% had antibodies to EBV as opposed to other viruses. Now keep in mind, as I said, that 90-95% of global population has the antibodies to EBV. It doesn't mean that these people are sick or they will develop multiple sclerosis. So that's kind of skewed. 19 of these 108 patients were followed monthly for 1 year, and positive early antigen and serum DNA were found in 72% of these with exacerbations during that year, and none in the group with a clinically stable disease. So in other words, especially early antigen, the serum DNA is not as predictable, but still between early antigen and DNA, 72% of those with the symptoms during that year had positive early antigen and DNA. So this was compared to the group with a clinically stable disease, right? So they didn't have exacerbation, suggesting that EBV may be the activator of the underlying disease process. Now there's one more thing that I need to say. Not good information, but important, that the brain-blood barrier protects us from chemical exposure, pathogens, but it can leak. And one of the things that EBV can do, it can breach that barrier, and the neurotoxicity that follows can lead to central nervous system lesions like MS, including the entry of autoreactive T cells. This is too much information, right? So this is kind of dangerous because that creates an avalanche of immune cell activation and so on and so forth, turning things on. So EBV can get in there, produce pro-inflammatory mediators, and the immune cells start to adhere, and they can model a key step in MS pathogenesis. That's a study from 2011. So the conclusion is, the bad news is that yes, there is a strong relationship. It seems like the virus is a prerequisite, according to some researchers, to multiple sclerosis, but it does not mean that if you have EBV, you are stuck with the future diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And especially if you take steps for EBV to turn it off, turn it down with our protocols, you can recover from EBV and at the same time turn off that higher risk of MS in future. So that would be my bottom line message to you. Again, we're going to have a link for the full article that I wrote with the studies, so you can go deeper and dissect them and get all the resources that you need.